Candlemancy. Written and narrated by Mountain Eyes of Mountain Eyes Narrations. You might not believe this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. I need to tell this to someone. So, if you don't believe in the supernatural, then just, I don't know, maybe you could give me some advice on what happened. I don't want to believe it was my fault, but if it was, well. This happened a few weeks ago, and I'm not sure what to think. You see, I recently made a friend. She's a kind girl, albeit one with low self-esteem. Sadly, there's a reason for that. Her family is nothing short of abusive. They have been for years, and they have put her through the metaphorical ringer. I won't get into the gruesome details, but her father is one of the most despicable beings that I have ever had the displeasure to meet. Thankfully, the meeting itself was brief, but it's one that remains with me. He is, for lack of a better word, scum. When you put the man up against someone that could easily and with no qualms defend themselves, if not outright overpower him, he backs off so fast it will nearly give you whiplash. But someone he sunk his psychological fangs into during childhood? Someone whom he convinced will be weaker than him and will always be worthless, useful for nothing more than being his scapegoat for everything that goes wrong in his life. Then, it gets complicated. My friend told me that she's managed to break free from him in the past, but something always happens to draw her back in. It's always something her family makes out to be far more dire than it actually is. A routine surgery to correct a broken arm turned into a possible tumor growth removal. A minor case of the flu, exaggerated to be on the cusp of turning into pneumonia. That sort of thing. She's a very generous person, so she'll sacrifice as much of her time, money, and soul to these pathetic moochers as they can guilt her into giving. After months, if not years, of cycles of verbal and even physical abuse, gaslighting, and guilt trips, she always breaks it off, but eventually, and against her better judgment, she goes back out of a sense of filial piety. That's why, having gotten myself out of a bad situation with my own toxic relative in the past, I was determined to be as supportive as she needed me to be for her to rally the confidence to finally end the cycle and contact once and for all. The problem with that is, after you've been in a dangerous environment for a long time, once that threat goes away, your body will eventually start to subconsciously distrust your new peaceful environment for a while. You may begin to feel anxious, jumping every time you hear a car door slam outside, wondering if it's your former abuser coming to find you. The worst part is usually the nightmares. It's like your brain, upon not encountering the danger, takes that feeling of waiting for the other shoe to drop to an extreme. Nightmares will creep in, exposing you to the worst possible terrors your mind can conjure, all as an attempt to say, hey, the danger is usually nearby at this time. It is time to wake up and prepare for it. I experienced a few of these myself, but mine paled in comparison to hers. Even now, remembering the graphic images she retold as she called me during a full-blown panic attack still sets my stomach to churning. Even worse is that I know for a fact that these are caused by her reliving, in a way, things her father did to her, and worse fates she narrowly escaped. The part that makes this so much worse is that not only has this man ruined so much for her in the past, but his influence has now creeped into her dreams and is even threatening her current relationship with a great guy. However, when she had nightmares where her loving new partner suddenly became a beastly version of himself as though her father shapeshifted to use his face to terrorize her in her nightmares until she awoke screaming to call me? Well, I've never been one to sit around and do nothing. Now, something that you need to know about me is that, while I am not a witch myself, I have grown up with them. I know the way to make certain spells, which oils and herbs are used for this or that effect, and the importance of keeping your living environment purified and free from negative energy and toxic influences. I also know that the most powerful results often come from the most powerful resolve. While I've never been the most religious person one way or the other, I am spiritual, and I have witnessed many occasions where certain things could not be explained. That being said, I knew the basic practices for various forms of divination, and decided to sit down with some candles and see if I could discover an end in sight for my friend's nightmarish dilemma. I've always found Candlemancy to be the most calming. Something about being in a warm, semi-darkened room, alone save for yourself and the brilliant glow of the candle's flame, is such a balm to my soul. Perhaps it is merely a placebo effect, but during the rare occasions I have asked for answers in such a way, I have received them. So, the other night, I pulled out a white candle and a few oils and got to work. Dressing the candle as I had been shown many times, I prepared to wait and see if the melted wax could provide any answers. It was then that, for the first time in my life, I felt the urge to attempt something more. I am not sure what made me do it, but I began putting things together seemingly on instinct. I took a small corner of a piece of paper and wrote my friend's name in the center of it. On one side, I put a symbol that I felt best fit me. On the other side, I drew a symbol representing her father, but drew it so that it faced away from mine. Finally, I dug out a little bottle I had never used before. A special oil blend my aunt had infused herself. I had always loved the clean, pungent to the point of nearly being acrid scent of this particular oil because it reminded me of my favorite aunt's house. I hardly ever got to see her nowadays, as she still lived in her little house not too far away from the Louisiana Gulf Coast, while I now lived nearly half a continent away. Before I left on my last visit, she presented me with a little jar as a going-away token. Never had I felt prior call to use it, but at that moment, it felt as though I held fate itself in the palm of my hand. I unscrewed the lid, took out one drop of the concoction, and smeared it across the man's name. Finally, with my offering complete, I said aloud, "Sweet dreams, my friend." Then I lowered the paper onto the flame until it covered the small divot in the wax that had been burned away. What happened next will remain with me until the end of my days. It took a moment, but when the paper ignited, it erupted into a puff of flame, leaving behind two smaller flames, one on each side of the paper. As it did, the wax beneath it slowly began to turn red. While I did have other candles of various colors arranged around my sole white one, none of them had dropped any wax into this one, and it had been burning cleanly up until that moment. This is when things began to get downright chilling. You see, I'm the sort of person whose anger smolders. When I get really and truly furious, it feels like being stabbed with a red-hot poker. It builds silently and slowly, and my hands will usually shake, and my words will chug and stutter as I try to maintain control. Inevitably, if I do not calm down, I will lash out loudly enough you can hear me from the next building over. Thankfully, my rage is rare, but it has more than scared off a few bullies in my younger years. Looking back, one flame behaved very much as my anger does, while the other danced a bit, leaning in toward the center of the paper where my friend's name was. Mine slowly flared into life and quickly surpassed it. I had my hands almost cupped around the outside of the heat radius, watching the glow grow brighter and brighter, chugging for a bit as if it were fighting with itself. Now, I've been around a lot of fires before, as I grew up near the woods where brush fires and campfires were common, but never had I felt such pressure coming off a flame. Mind you, I've only had the barest lessons in candlemancy and spell work from my friends and family, and I've never gotten close enough to see if this happens when you burn certain oils. But I swear, I could feel something was pressing back against my hands. However, as I was still angry from trying to calm down my friend all day, and being reminded her sick freak of a father was still on the loose, it didn't occur to me to be too creeped out at the time. Rather, I let out a breath and focused on the flames that flickered beneath my hands. Focus your energy, my aunt used to say, but I had never really thought about what that meant until that point. As I continued to watch the flame, a strange image came to my mind. It was like seeing the interior of my friend's dream. When the creature masquerading as her new partner came into view, my mind, unbidden, called forth an image of some shadowy figure stepping out of the darkened hallway and taking its place before my friend. It never faced me, so I was unable to tell whether it was a man or a woman, and the very sight of the figure itself seemed to blur in my mind's eye so that I couldn't make out many details. All I could see was that it was clothed in the very same deep red that had been bleeding out from the burning paper and into my candle. In this thing's presence, I saw the impostor's form shift and leave behind the father of my friend, and, for the first time since I had met this man, he wore an expression of abject horror. Deep inside me, I felt thrilled at his fear. I stared into the flame as it brightened, the scene still superimposed over the brilliant light. I wished for the figure to move forward, to scare this nightmare version of a living hell beast some more, to the point that I may have willed it. When it finally moved, my friend's father's terror grew, and I swear I could almost hear the silent scream I saw mouthed in the flames. Shortly, as they disappeared into the shadows of the hall, the image faded out as the candle's flame rose until it nearly reached my fingers. It danced upwards, as if laughing, and I moved my hands back to keep it from lapping at my skin. For a moment, the flame danced even higher. And then, I kid you not, it turned on the smaller flame. The flame that had formed over the name of my friend's father had initially been the taller flame and had danced around. But now, this large flame suddenly sank down to nearly half its height and bent in an arc over the smaller. At first, I thought the air current created when I moved my hands might have done it. But it hovered ominously over the other for a couple seconds more than the flame should ever have been able to do stationary at that angle. I swear to you, I watched as this bright and imposing flame must have robbed the oxygen feeding its much smaller counterpart, because it instantly let out a soft hiss and fizzled out. The victorious flame then shrank back down onto the paper, remaining at around an inch in height. Only now, it wasn't glowing super bright, but the bottom of the flame turned clear, then a deep cobalt blue near the base as it began to burn away the rest of the paper until it was all gone. My aunt's words returned. A blue flame in candlework means that there are spirits about, and they have heard your plea. Only when the flame had returned to the wick had enough of the candle burned away from the right side that it allowed the wax to run out, trailing out onto the foil I had set beneath the candle until a pinkish-white blob with a long streak of red poured out to form almost a silhouette of what appeared to be the head and shoulders of a man. After that, the creep factor finally kicked in and I extinguished the flame. It almost didn't want to die, and I panicked, spilling my water and finally blowing it out as a last resort. As the thick white smoke curled up into my face, I could only look on in complete bewilderment at what I had seen. I felt drained but elated, like I had won some great battle. And I remember thinking, man, I would not want to be her dad right now. So why am I telling you this story? Well, my friend most definitely stopped having the nightmares. In addition, things seem to have progressed well with her new man and her life in general. It's amazing what little sleep and some healthy relationships can do for a person. Yeah, okay, so I did tell her what happened and what I saw, and after a few weeks of decent rest, she seems to think that she has some guardian that has banished all of her father's negativity from her dreams. Whatever helps, right? But I'm not wholly sure that she's not on to something. You see, my friend may have cut off contact with her family, but I've still got a few mutual acquaintances, so I have been getting updates and, well, none of them are pretty. I've heard reports from her father's neighbors that he has been complaining about not being able to sleep because of nightmares. At one point, it got so bad that he actually tore out of his house early one morning, looking around wildly and yelling like a madman that he had to get out of that house as he kept seeing it in the halls. Apparently, he was so out of his mind that, on his mad dash to his vehicle, he cut his arm when he nearly body-checked a porch post on his way down the steps. His neighbors told me it was bleeding pretty badly. The scary thing is, I kept the foil the candle wax poured out onto, and the morning her father cut his arm, I woke up to find the white congealed wax had suddenly blossomed red. It's been slowly getting worse ever since. When I check on it in the morning, there will always be more parts of it that have turned red. Right now, nearly the entire head has turned that deep crimson red. And it's spreading. I don't want to believe it's my fault that this man is having all of this happening to him. But if it is, well, it's not something that I will lose any sleep over.